Hello, YouTube viewers. This is just a video on, I guess it would be called reasons for deconversion, and speaking about certain subjects about the religion, mainly Christianity, for this particular video. And maybe one of the first, if I'm trying to remember all the different reasons why I could no longer accept the claims and postulations of Christianity, because to me, one of the most fundamental core doctrines that is central to the Christian religion and gospel message, that of substitutionary atonement as a requirement for forgiveness of original sin, or the sin nature of human beings, accomplished by the sacrifice of Jesus' death by crucifixion, is simultaneously one of the most illogical, confounding, convoluted, and absurd when you sit down and analyze the details of the whole setup. Well, the first problem arises when assuming the theological concept of sin exists in the first place, and secondly, that it is humans who are the ones who bear the ultimate responsibility and blameworthiness for this apparently innate or intrinsic feature of our deterministic nature. A nature that was never willfully caused, nor was it created by ourselves. That is to say, we're not the causa sui, or the self-created or self-caused makers of who we are. I would submit that it is a basic, undeniable truth that we human apes could never voluntarily choose our nature. Our psychological states, our temperaments, our desires, whether it is inherently selfish and egoistic, including what are seemingly altruistic actions, as some evolutionary psychologists and philosophers like Thomas Hobbes and Philip Mainlander argued, that being an adjacent topic for a separate and diverging discussion. But a theist can continue to harangue us with the metaphysical assertion of libertarian free will, which almost no physicist, biologist, neuroscientist, or philosopher subscribes to unless they hold a religious faith that necessitates its existence. But it is plain to see that we're not in full autonomous control of emotions, thoughts, and personality traits. We're not the authors of our animal desires, the arising of urges and impulses and ancient instincts that comprise the psychology and behavioral dispositions of each individual, many practically shared by members of our species and between other species, especially mammals and those that we are closest related to. And these are classified as sins by the biblical writers and the church. For instance, and this is a big one if you grew up in a sort of very fundamentalist, strict evangelical home, or very conservative Catholic, or even Islamic household, sexual attraction and this strong, dominating craving to have sex for pleasurable experience, which is then forbidden and excoriated, as a prime example of our wretched depravity and disgustingness. Even erotic sexual thoughts that emerge spontaneously in our minds or are an automatic arousal response to sexually provoking stimuli that we similarly cannot volitionally control is condemned as lust. Fleeting feelings of physical attraction to a woman, as Jesus himself says in Matthew 5:27 through 28. Are equivalent to the act of adultery. He says, you've been told not to commit adultery, but I tell you, those who look upon a woman with lust have already committed adultery in their hearts. Not verbatim the verse, but that is pretty close to what the verse says. So forget totalitarian regimes that are all looked to in terror and condemned, like North Korea or Nazi Germany or the Stasi secret police of the former GDR, East Germany. Or Pol Pot or whatever. Under this system, you're quite literally convicted of thought crime. But how is this God of classical theism and the Abrahamic monotheistic religions, such as Christianity in particular, a God that is defined as having multiple omni characteristics such as omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, who is the creator and prime mover, how is this being absolved of culpability for the effects of the genetic encoding, hormonal endocrine system influences, and neurophysiology of human brains that give rise to such instinctual drives and behavior that is then designated as a transgression against its holiness? We can, for example, view the brains of individuals displaying psychopathic traits or have antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, or usually called sociopaths. We can see with neuroimaging technologies such as functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs, and diffusion tensor images, along with some information derived from postmortem dissection. And we find abnormalities in the amygdala in psychopaths. This almond-shaped subcortical structure of the limbic system, one amygdalae in each hemisphere, which is involved in basically processing and responding to fear, learning, fear and anxiety through classical conditioning, emotionally salient memories, usually of a negative, unpleasant quality or character, as well as playing a role in aggression. We see decreased activity is visible in brains of psychopathic subjects who have committed criminal offenses of some kind. When they are presented with images that depict moral violations of some kind. And we've also observed reduction in gray matter volume in the amygdala of diagnosed psychopaths compared to groups of normal, healthy controls without this pathology. We know that psychopaths show a marked absence of fear and greater confidence when they are in conditions that would normally invoke intense anxiety, boldness, and indifference to dangerous situations, and environments such as participating in violent activities is one of the hallmark symptoms. Reduction in activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate is also observed in positron emission tomography scans. These areas are basically the neural correlates responsible for moral judgments and empathy, interpreting emotions of others, and feelings of remorsefulness and guilt. Decreased structural connectivity and communication, but in the white matter fibers between the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala have also been detected. Yeah, there's that. And going further into the genetics, we see genetic and biochemical differences, such as the low expression variant of what's called the MOAA gene, a gene which codes for an enzyme that functions to break down monoamine neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, a lot of neurotransmitters we all know, or neuromodulators. And this shorter allele found on the X chromosome is predictive of psychopathy and antisocial behavior and greater propensity for aggression. And it additionally explains why psychopaths are predominantly male, as the male sex only has one X chromosome received from the mother, and whereas women with two X chromosomes, this allele or the expression of it is usually canceled out, and of course there are examples when this doesn't quite might work out and we see female psychopaths, but it is much, much lower and then more rare. But like when you listen to interviews with some killer, like contract killer, hitman Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, he speaks so nonchalantly and matter-of-factly in describing the methods in which he takes out his victims. And I believe he even talks about just the physiological responses, you know, going on in the body as he's doing this. And it's been shown in other studies on psychopaths that there is no increase in heart rate or elevation of stress associated glucocorticoids, stress hormones, cortisol, no rise in blood pressure. When they are callously and unemotionally breaking someone's neck. So I must inquire with incredulity, where is this libertarian contra-causal free will, and where and when is the deliberate, decisive choice to be this way taken? Many are asking the question, how could a person do X when they themselves could never conceive of committing such heinously cruel, repugnant actions against a fellow human or non-human animal? To provide an answer along the lines of they are just evil or it is just their sin is utterly simplistic and a childish account devoid of explanatory power. An unscientific, thought-stopping cliche which only satisfies the common dullard entrenched in this dogma. It's not in any sense an accurate, scrupulous explanation derived from rigorous empirical research. We're sinners is no more of an explicatory answer than responding to why do we enjoy foods high in sugar. Because we like the taste of sugar. But returning to the whole concept of the atonement, it begins with the premise of shifting responsibility for the sinfulness that arises from a defective nature away from this God and onto humans, who, if anything, are the victims. And yet this supreme deity, a being with absolute sovereignty that is purported to be the creator and sustainer of all, including Homo sapiens, which are made in his own image, which is a whole other extremely problematic anthropomorphic can of worms, but I'll refrain from that digression. I would actually say the Calvinists who reject free will and subscribe to predeterminism, or basically a kind of fatalism, get closer to the true implications. Disquieting conclusions about the unpalatable, not so loving character of God that are, or would be, unacceptable to most other Christians. But consider a comparable analogy which I did not originally conceive of entirely, but I've made some modifications. But it's basically imagining there's a CEO of an electric car company who also has the dual role of being the lead engineer and designer. So he intentionally produces cars with faulty batteries as a cost-cutting measure that he has complete knowledge will cause the vehicle to catch fire and explode if involved in a crash. Let's even say his designs make it statistically more probable for these cars to veer off the road or for the brakes to fail. And when, not if, these cars inevitably crash and become engulfed in flames with the unsuspecting driver trapped inside, this CEO is then angrily chastising the victims. He's saying, I demand compensation for this. Shouting with indignation and wrath, I need someone to die a brutal, torturous death as repayment for the damages incurred. He then goes on to claim that those who purchased the cars, along with any passengers, deserve to be slowly burned and die in the subsequent explosion. This all sounds nonsensically ridiculous in a preposterous scenario indeed, but is this not any fair, analogous comparison to the ingenious plan of having Jesus crucified as a means of delivering forgiveness to an inherently sinful human race, or atoning for some inherited intergenerational original sin, depending on the given denomination's interpretation, which again, we must re-emphasize, we had no choice in acquiring by birth, nor any ability to consent to be brought into existence from the peaceful slumber of eternally proceeding nothingness in the first place. The apologist has the unenviable job of performing elaborate and, I'd say, very unconvincing mental gymnastics to absolve God, to extricate God from the whole equation. In other words, he must act as the defense attorney for the aforementioned CEO who builds these designed to blow up electric vehicle batteries. And then there's the whole convoluted wackiness of this arrangement for granting redemption or salvation. God must send his son down to first century Judea, who is a human version of himself, to be executed by the Romans at behest of the Jewish authorities, as he is apparently being blasphemous and causing a ruckus, violating the Sabbath. Although why the Romans would care about intra-theological differences and need to execute him, crucify him, which was a punishment reserved for criminals and those engaged in basically promoting violent insurrection, sedition against Rome, is another topic, but he must be sent down as a sacrifice to himself in this blood magic, and then dispenses forgiveness for an allegedly innate, hardwired sin nature which this entity, this God, either actively planted or passively allowed to evolve from the beginning, who additionally possessed total, infallible foreknowledge of the horrendous consequences of this flawed dysfunctionality if they are omniscient. And I mean, if we're comparing mythologies, one could say Prometheus sacrificed infinitely more by bringing fire down to the humans. Suffering of Jesus on the cross, who, according to the Gospels, died fairly quickly, whereas most victims of crucifixion would end up hanging there for days, nailed up, probably dying of starvation and just dehydration, and been allowed to just hang there and rot and be eaten by vultures and other carrion. But Jesus doesn't even have to have his legs broken like the other two criminals on the right and left of him. But then his corpse is magically resurrected and then goes around prowling around with the disciples as if nothing happened, and only to return to being one with God and infinity after 2 nights of eating fish and showing his hands with the holes and saying, "Look, I'm flesh, I'm not a ghost. Stupid Thomas, how could you doubt me?" At least this was a temporary 1-day ordeal. In hell, the unfortunate victims of myotrophic lateral sclerosis / Lou Gehrig's disease, any degenerative neurological disease, or locked-in syndrome, or those who get horribly disfigured in wars or lose all their limbs and become quadriplegics, suffer far worse. This suffering can go on for days, years, their whole entire lives. But that is my commentary and breakdown of the whole theological doctrine of atonement and sin. Maybe another video of this type will come soon, maybe not. But thanks for watching.